Are members aware of any apologies?
I've had an apology from Harry, Deputy Chair.
Okay. Any other apologies members are aware of? Okay. I'd ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove all the members from the spotlight and add the witnesses. And I'd refer members to the Controlled School Support Council response to the call for evidence on the Integrated Education Bill, and that's on page 5. And I'd like to welcome Mr. Mark Baker, Chief Executive, Controlled School Support Council, and Miss Jane Miller, Head of Education Support, Controlled School Support Council. Could I advise the witnesses that the committee will give them 10 minutes to make an opening statement, and that will be followed by questions from members, which can be answered by either of you. So the floor is yours. Go ahead with your opening statement. Thanks.
Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Chair, or Vice Chair, as it is. I'm taking it that you can hear us okay, and you'll tell us if you can't.
Yes.
So we'd like to thank you for this opportunity to talk on behalf of Controlled Schools about this very important bill that we've given significant consideration to ourselves over the last 4 months. I would ask for some patience. I will try to hit 10 minutes, but I'm sure you'll guide me, Pat, if you need me to move on or move more quickly. So at the outset, we would like to state clearly that the Controlled School Support Council is fully committed to educating children and young people from all community backgrounds together. Indeed, that is the fundamental premise of the controlled sector. CSSC is a voluntary body set up in September 2016 to represent and support the interests of the controlled sector, and in so doing address its historical deficit. We support controlled schools, which are open to all faiths and none, in providing high quality education for children and young people to enable them to learn, develop and grow together within the ethos of non-denominational Christian values and principles. The diversity of the controlled sector is evident in the age of pupils it serves, 3 to 19, as well as in the types and locations of the schools which it represents. It celebrates the inclusion of nursery, primary, special and post-primary schools within its wide-reaching community, welcoming all young people, whoever they are and wherever they come from. The controlled sector is the largest education sector in Northern Ireland, accounting for 49% of all schools and catering for 146,138 pupils. The inclusivity of the controlled sector is further demonstrated by our controlled integrated and controlled Irish medium schools. These schools are no less controlled than any other type of school within the sector, and we value and support these schools to the same extent as all other controlled schools. They contribute to the rich diversity that exists in the sector. For controlled integrated schools, a transformation process provides an opportunity to access additional support, to promote their integrated status, ultimately to demonstrate more explicitly to communities that they welcome children from both traditional backgrounds or all faiths and none, as is the case for all controlled schools. CSSC has been concerned in relation to misunderstanding and in some cases misrepresentation in respect of the controlled sector. Controlled schools are sometimes erroneously referred to as Protestant schools. We welcome the opportunity to dispel this myth and in the context of this bill to provide the following robust and accurate evidence regarding the controlled sector. Fewer than 2/3 of pupils in controlled schools are Protestant. The latest census figure has 61% Protestant, 10% Catholic and 29% other. Over half of primary and post-primary controlled schools have more than 30% of pupils identifying as Catholic or other. A number of controlled schools have a higher proportion of Catholic compared to Protestant pupils. 39.5% of newcomer pupils in Northern Ireland attend controlled schools, and 28% of controlled pupils are entitled to free school meals. These are increasing trends which support the fact that controlled schools welcome children from all backgrounds, and therefore not Protestant schools. This sectoral profile underpins our endorsement of the executive support for educating children and young people of different backgrounds together in the classroom. The controlled sector continues to contribute significantly to this aim and has much to contribute to building a shared society. The organisation seeks to raise awareness of shared education amongst controlled schools by encouraging and facilitating their participation. 48% of schools actively involved in shared education partnerships are controlled schools. You may therefore think that our opening remarks suggest that CSSC would have no concerns in relation to this bill. Unfortunately, that is not the case. CSSC has given the bill significant consideration over the last 4 months, and its implications for the controlled sector and the wide education system have been discussed by our council. CSSC, in representing the interests of the controlled sector, has grave concerns in relation to some of the content and potential ramifications of the bill, should it be accepted into law in its current form. If the bill becomes law, all other grant-aided schools in Northern Ireland will be placed in a secondary position to integrated schools. CSSC welcomes the independent review of education. We believe that it will be inappropriate to progress legislation which will elevate an individual sector above all others prior to this fundamental review. It is difficult to see how the proposal for this legislation in advance of the review reporting is compatible with an objective and transparent review for setting out a vision for education for the future. If we are going to truly transform our education system, then we must work together with a clear focus on equality in raising standards and improving the quality of education for all our children and young people. We will now briefly outline our concerns in relation to specific aspects of the bill. Clause 1 of the draft bill is a fundamental change and dilution of the existing legislative definition of integrated education, which gives integrated education its distinctive character. As already demonstrated, controlled schools welcome pupils of different cultures and religious beliefs or none, pupils from all backgrounds and those of different abilities. The definition proposed in the bill for integrated education applies to a wide range of education and duplicates that which already exists in the controlled sector. Clause 2 of the draft bill outlines the purpose of integrated education. The 5 points listed represent the purpose of controlled education, and we believe should also be the purpose of all grant-aided education in Northern Ireland. Clause 4 proposes to extend the existing statutory requirements on the Department and the EA to encourage, facilitate and promote integrated education. The promotion requirement and the meaning given in clauses 4 and 5 have significant implications for the controlled sector and the children and young people attending its schools. Currently, the Department and the EA do not promote one sector over another. Resource invested in the promotion of integrated education as required by the bill would be at the expense of other sectors, and more importantly, the children and young people in their schools. As the sectoral support body for controlled schools, we expect equal and fair consideration to be given to the needs of the 146,000 children and young people in controlled schools. Clause 5 also has significant implications for area planning, policy and process. The aim of area planning is to ensure that all primary and post-primary pupils have access to a broad and balanced curriculum that meets their educational needs in a school that is educationally and financially viable and sustainable. In its outworkings, this bill would make area planning unworkable. The department requires the statutory planning authorities, EA and CCMS, school managing authorities and sectoral support bodies to identify current and future education needs and develop solutions to meet these on an area basis. All sectors are represented in area planning structures at all levels. These provide a forum for cooperation and agreement between all sectors. The promotion of integrated education as outlined in the bill requires the department to identify, assess and monitor the need for integrated schools. It places a further requirement on the department to aim to increase demand and to provide sufficient places to meet that demand. This is contrary to the fundamental principles of area planning, and in its outworkings would threaten sustainability in controlled schools. Together with Clause 7, Clause 5 has significant implications not only for the sustainability of controlled schools, but for all sectors and for the public purse. The disregard of the religious demographics of an area or spare places in existing schools contradicts the purpose of integrated education, as proposed and outlined in Clause 2 to promote the efficient and effective use of resources. CSSC finds Clause 7 unacceptable. It overrides the area planning process through which CSSC, working with EA, represents the interests of the controlled sector. To apply the presumption that an establishment of a new school will be an integrated school unless inappropriate does not consider the views of the wider community. The assumption in the bill is that all parents want an integrated school as the default solution. This impacts on parental preference and appears to devalue all education other than integrated. Under the 1997 Education Order, provision is made for parents to express a preference for the school or schools that they wish their children to attend. For the department to invest in the promotion of integrated education as required by the bill would be detrimental to parents who express a preference for other sectors. Parental preference is complex. It is a tangled interplay of personal values, aspirations, and pragmatic decisions. A study conducted by the University of Ulster Community Conversation in South Belfast in March 2019 considered facts that influence primary school preference. The evidence indicated that parents consistently identified quality of education as a key factor affecting their decisions on primary school preference, with 67% ranking this above school sector and ethos, which was 26%, and distance to school, which was 6%. While some polls point to significant support for integrated schools, it is important to remember that the input of individual parents to a particular school is by its nature relatively short term, but educational planning also needs long-term perspectives and continuity. A balance is needed between the right to exercise individual, possibly shifting and at times unpredictable preference, and the maintenance of a stable base for a long-term educational strategy. Parents have remained loyal to existing good schools because what parents overwhelmingly seek is a good school. The quality of education outcomes must be the focus of the attention rather than individual sectors or any political interest. It is difficult to see how other educational bodies could include provision for integrated education in their strategies, plans and policies as proposed in Clause 6. This will be an unreasonable and unworkable request for a number of the designated educational bodies. It will create tension between the bodies that will be counterproductive to promoting unity in education and will lead to costly judicial reviews. Linked to this, Clause 3 requires that on any function that the Department of Education seeks to carry out, it is required to consult with anybody which includes in its objectives the provision of support and advice to the Department in its promotion of integrated education. The assumption is that that would be the Northern Ireland Council for Integrated Education, NICE, who would be that body. CSSC would consider it a clear conflict of interest that the Department would be required to consult with NICE as one of several sectoral bodies on its funding, on our funding and programme of work. Clause 8 requires the Department to prepare, publish and maintain an integrated education strategy. The existing duty on the Department to encourage and facilitate the development of integrated education already provides for actions to be taken by the Department and the EA for integrated schools that do not have to be taken for other schools. The active promotion of integrated education by the Department and the Education Authority effectively undermines the essential functions and purposes of shared education, which are to bring together children of different backgrounds through collaboration across our school system, including all school types where each is equally valued. Shared education policy sits within a broader education policy framework designed to improve educational outcomes for all children and young people and to tackle identified educational underachievement rather than the advancement and promotion of one sector above all others. In a context where the department budget is constrained with significant underfunding, as members will note, estimated last week by the department at 350 million for the next financial year in inescapable pressures. The costs associated with this bill are a significant concern for CSSC. Funding must be prioritised to meet the needs of the child, not a single type of school above all others. CSSC is committed to ensuring that there is equality of treatment for all and for every child within the controlled sector, alongside every child in other sectors. We want to see opportunities.
Apologies for interrupting you. We are pressed for time this morning, and you've had about 12 minutes so far. I'll give you another minute if you can wrap up. Thanks.
That's fine. I was about to say the words in conclusion, Pat, if that's okay. And I thank you for your patience. In its current form, the bill fails to acknowledge the diversity of the controlled sector and fails to acknowledge that the ethos of the controlled sector is that it's open to all. The New Decade New Approach priority to support educating our children and young people of different backgrounds together in a classroom is delivered on a daily basis, not only with controlled schools themselves, but also through their participation in shared education partnerships. As outlined above, there are potential wider implications and unintended consequences rising from the bill, not least in relation to area planning and the future makeup of the school estate. This prioritisation of one group of schools over all others, which CSSC contends would have an adverse effect on the quality of the education provision, educational outcomes for children, young people in all other schools, would erode much of the progress that has been made in building good community relations. To conclude, finally, Pat, this bill comes at a point when the education system in Northern Ireland is undergoing an extensive independent review. We welcome that review. Therefore, it's wholly inappropriate at this time to propose substantial changes to one aspect of the education system. Through engagement in relation to this bill, we have been heartened by statements made by all sectors of schools being open to all and the need for inclusion. We contend that through sectors collaborating and working closely together through the various area planning processes and through schools being actively involved in shared education programs, the NDNA aim already stated can be delivered. Prioritising one sector above all others does not facilitate this work. I thank you for your patience, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that, Mark. And I'm going to hand back to our chair who has arrived. He was delayed slightly, so I'll hand over to Chris. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Pat. Thanks for stepping in. I'll just ask a couple of quick questions and then I'll try to hand back to yourself quickly there, Pat. Thanks for your opening remarks, folks. I have to make a short comment at the start to say that the suggestion that the bill or the proposer of the bill devalue all education other than integrated education is very unhelpful and very inaccurate. But moving on from that, a couple of quick questions. Mark, do you think the Good Friday Belfast Agreement elevates integrated education?
Chris, I think, and you'll excuse me if I call you Chris and not Chair, won't you?
That's right. Absolutely.
The Good Friday Belfast Agreement, along with a number of political agreements, and I would leave it to politicians to address those agreements rather than ourselves. I am not an expert in the Good Friday Agreement, Chris. However, it promotes and should rightly promote our children, inclusive education, the open nature of our schools, and our children and young people being educated together. That is not a sectoral state, Chris. It is a status, and we would, as you heard yesterday, I think from the TRC, we would firmly state that the controlled sector is a sector which is open to all, and the controlled sector on a daily basis delivers on what the Good Friday Agreement proposes and promotes.
I'm actually starting to get a wee bit concerned about the revisionism that appears to be going on here. It doesn't reference children being educated together. It references integrated education. You rightly refer to some other documents as well. Tackling Paramilitarism Task Force called on the executive to put specific measurable targets in place for integrated education, and the New Decade New Approach uses the language that you've referred to in terms of children being educated together. So I think multiple documents have set out a need for the advancement of integrated education. How do you think area planning is currently working, and how do you think it is currently meeting demand for integrated education?
As you're aware, area planning is a cross-sectoral process which looks at area solutions. Colleagues from NICE are involved at all levels, as are colleagues from all other sectors. The planning for the school estate and the planning for the provision in the school estate is carried out throughout that process. Could area planning be improved as a process? There is no doubt, and there are constant ongoing moves to make that forward. In terms of what is success, Chris, I think that the success must not solely be around integrated education. Area planning is about providing quality education and about planning for the future educational needs, ultimately of Northern Ireland and the children and young people who are our future. So, the question as to whether or not it meets the needs of integrated education is more a question, I would suggest, for NICE and their role within area planning. Can I make one point, Chris? And I'm sorry. I have no intention of revision. I am not an expert in the Good Friday Agreement. I have not come along. Neither is my body in any way whatsoever. I would suggest the intention of integrated education is the education of our children and young people together. Is that not the purpose of integrated education? It's the purpose within the bill, and we agree with those purposes, Chris. We firmly agree with those purposes, which is why we believe all grant-aided schools should be so. But by stating potentially, and I think this is what needs to be clarified in the bill, by stating potentially that a type of school should be prioritised. Surely we should be working with all schools, Chris. Surely we should be working with all schools.
Okay, yeah, I just found it strange that you couldn't refer to the fact that the Good Friday Agreement calls on us to encourage and facilitate integrated education. You don't need to be an expert to know that, and you just need to have read the agreement. But my last question, I suppose, then would be it, and I accept that school, that any school that we've spoken to absolutely has the stated aim of being open to all. Absolutely. But if DE figures suggest that around 15% only of our schools have at least 10% of pupils from a Catholic background and 10% of pupils from a Protestant background, how well are we achieving those aims?
Again, Chris, that comes down to what is success and what is the definition of an integrated school. Within this bill, and we referred to it, the bill removes what were the targets as such, the thresholds for an integrated school. So, and the bill actually defines integrated education as being schools that are intentionally open to all. Which we would agree with and we would support 100%. What the bill doesn't say is that 10% is good, 15% is good, 20% is good. It is the status of school, and as I'm sure committee members have heard frequently over the last number of days, we're not talking about busing our children around cities to ensure that one school has a balance or otherwise. Surely it is around the ethos of the school, Chris, and that ethos runs throughout the school, including most importantly, the respect for all throughout what happens in the school. That is at the heart of what should be a school that's open to all, and at the heart of what should be inclusive education. So success being numbers, and there are challenges across all schools in terms of the numbers of pupils from different backgrounds being attracted to the schools, including integrated schools, Chris. And I think that's what is success. It's not numbers, Chris. It's about the ethos and the attitude of the children and young people as they progress through the school system and into our society. Surely that is the case.
It's probably about Board of Governor makeup and other things as well. Yeah, absolutely. We can get into those issues as well. I've used my time. I'll pass on to Deputy Chairperson Pat Sheehan, MLA. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks again, Mark and Jane. I'm not someone who believes that integrated education is a panacea to all the ills that we face as a society here. However, instinctively, the vast majority of us would like to see our children mix with and be educated with children from different political, cultural, religious backgrounds, and be able to do that freely. And most surveys that are carried out find that up to 80% of people are in favour of integrated education. Now, if we just sort of say, right, we'll allow that integration to happen organically, we'll be here in another 100 years talking about the same thing. So I suppose the question I have for you, Mark, is, why should the integrated sector not be given a privileged position? Why should they not be given a leg up if that's what society actually wants and the most of us want? And I accept your point. It's not just about integration, but also about good quality education as well. Why shouldn't resources be directed in that direction? Thanks.
Thank you for your question, Pat. I think it's very important to consider the opinions of parents, the opinions of communities and of wider society. Of course it is. I'm not going to get into opinion polls because I'm certainly not going to question methodology in any way whatsoever. And as you state, the poll results are clear and evident and consistent Our question has to be, is it just one type of school which is deemed as being integrated at the moment, which is deemed to be a grant maintained integrated or a controlled integrated? Is it just one type of school that can deliver on that integrated with a smaller I education? Because we firmly state that controlled schools are open to all, controlled schools are inclusive. So we believe that on a daily basis, that the desires of the population are met. I do believe, and we firmly believe, that we need investment across our whole system on a number of levels. But if we go specifically, it's not that in the integrated sector should be prioritised, Pat. It is that inclusion, diversity, shared education, and integration should be equally promoted across the system, without the danger of overly promoting at a time when we have a significant pressure next year of £350 million at a time to invest in one sector potentially at the expense of others. That's our concern. We're talking about equality here, but we are firmly stating that all schools should be alongside our colleagues in integrated schools, promoting the education of our children together. Firmly state that. I hope that answers in some way, Pat.
Well, I mean, the integrated sector and those involved in the integrated sector have told us that, the ethos in their school will be about inclusivity and about cultural diversity, not some neutral culture, but one that incorporates all cultures. And I'm just wondering, in the controlled sector, Mark. I mean, around this time of the year, poppies would be very evident in controlled schools. In a lot of the schools, they'll be available, they're being sold, and so on and so forth. But that same facility wouldn't be made available for Easter lilies, for example, to commemorate those who sacrificed their lives in the fight for Irish freedom. So, how can you talk about inclusivity and cultural diversity when you actually operate a system that is exclusive? Thanks.
Very, very interesting areas, Pat, as I'm sure you're aware. I would be concerned that our schools are being seen to promote one specific understanding of our historical past and the desire of our future together. Controlled schools clearly draw from the communities in which they live. And if with the communities within which they are based and draw from, they have the challenge of supporting the wishes and the desires of the local community, supporting the culture, yes, that many of them do come from, but also promoting that diversity. Are there more things to be learned, Pat? Of course there are more things to be learned. And it will be the investment around how we move forward in those areas that's needed. But stating, education is not black and white in this kind of a context. We need to move to a situation where the inclusivity is truly understood and is truly valued. And what does that look like? But communities have to be part of that conversation, do they not?
But if you're talking about inclusion, surely, and you're telling us that controlled schools actually are integrated, then you're not just talking about one community.
No, we're not. We're not talking about one community at all. We're talking about all of the communities that are represented in the school and an understanding. Pat, I don't have figures to hand, and I actually haven't been in a school for the last couple of days, so I can't tell you what controlled schools at this time of the year are celebrating Remembrance Sunday and what controlled schools do at other times of the year. And I wouldn't want to make assumptions, Pat, in any way whatsoever. Should controlled schools be inclusive and diverse? Of course they should be inclusive and diverse. It's how we move that forward together and how we learn together about what we do in that context.
Okay, Pat.
Okay, thanks for that. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Pat. Robin Newton, MLA, please. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair, and can I thank CSSC for coming along today, Mark and Jane. And apologies for being a few minutes late joining the meeting. And I think I'm probably in the same ethos as has been outlined by Mark and Jane, that I am a supporter of integrated education and want to see all our children educated together. And it would be wonderful if we only had the one educational system, but we're not there. I think the evidence that is being given to us today, concerns being relayed today, are very much in line with what we heard yesterday, Chair. Maybe with a wee bit more passion today, but that's not a bad thing. I've really only two questions, Chair. And Mark mentioned, that he was that CSSC were very much on board for a shared society. I think most of us are on board for that. And maybe he would just expand a wee bit more around that and shared education. And then he indicated that that CSSC have grave concerns for the bill and the ramifications of the bill, and mentioned only, I think, one aspect there, and that was around the potential of judicial reviews. Maybe if I could ask Mark and Jane if they would expand on those 2 points, Chair.
Thank you, Robin. I'm very happy to talk about shared education, as I have done previously to committee. And it's worth stating, in my past, I was heavily involved in various shared education projects. Shared education is a process whereby all schools work closely together across a number of areas, addressing both the important point of having our children and young people being educated together, but also the important point of addressing key issues around educational outcomes, underachievement, and the provision of the curriculum across area communities and otherwise, and build strong relationships between schools and therefore the communities they represent. I think that shared education being a more ground-up approach, and as your colleague and Diane Dodd stated yesterday, seeing the variety of uniforms that go in and out of our schools on a daily basis now is very positive, because that is indicative of a shared society. Schools should be shared spaces. And so therefore our children and young people being educated together whilst retaining the specific ethos of their own school and obviously of their own communities, but sharing those together, celebrating the differences, is really important. Is there more to be done on shared education? Of course there's more to be done on shared education. It is not a finished product as such. There is, over half of controlled schools are involved in shared education partnerships. There are more partnerships that need to be developed, and I'm sure and would hope that the Education Authority will be able to address that, given that that is the role that they play. So shared education is a fundamental part of how we address our shared future. And by our children and young people being educated together in and out of each other's schools on frequent basis, we would hope that clearly gives a message to communities that our schools are shared spaces and that there is a shared future together. In terms of financial implications and judicial reviews, our concern specifically is in relation to the establishment of new schools being integrated by default. And exactly what does that mean in terms of the definition of integrated? So if a controlled school, which is open to all and inclusive, is to be established in an area, does that count as an integrated school? Because the potential judicial review is a challenge around what is that and what is not. And I believe we believe firmly the definitions of integrated education within this bill are potentially open to challenge. By diverting resources away from children and young people in all schools at a time when there is significant issues around underachievement, where there is significant underfunding, and committee members will have heard evidence from the Department of Education about the level of funding of all pupils in our school. We need equality. Funding needs to be directed at need. The problem with this bill is it has wide-ranging implications. At the heart, its intentions are sound, promoting our children and young people being educated together. The complexity here must be left for the independent review.
That's 5 minutes, Mark. Sorry to cut across. Just want to make sure Robin knows his time. That's 5 minutes, Robin. If you want to ask a final question. Sorry to cut across, Mark. Just on tight timings.
Understand, Chair.
No, I'd be quite happy if Mark finished the point he was going to make, Chair.
Thanks, Robin. Mark.
Thank you, Chris. So it's just ensuring that equality and our funding needs to be addressed at the point of need at the moment. The elements of this bill, as I said, whilst this bill is at its core well-intentioned, and we agree with what is at the core of this, the purposes of integrated education, the wider elements of this must be left for an independent review. This is too complex to be dealt with in this manner, we would state.
Okay.
Can I thank Mark for those comments, and I think certainly the independent review is a major factor on where this bill goes. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Robin. Mark, could I ask a really quick question just in terms of shared education? In what way is shared education measured and reported on in terms of what it is, the extent of it, and the impact that it's having?
Chris, very happy to answer quickly, but you should direct that question, I would suggest, to the Education Authority, because they are the lead body. But what I would say is there's significant peer-reviewed evidence around shared education, as you're aware, and there's biannual reporting to the department as part of the Shared Education Act. Chris, there is more work to be done. You know that, as there is more work to be done across the board.
Okay. Can I bring in Daniel McCrossan, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark, for your opening remarks and also the detailed responses to questions. Just very quickly, I'm a product of the controlled sector. I attended Strabane Primary School. It was the local school, the nearest school to where my parents lived. And certainly, I would always claim that I benefited from one of the most naturally integrated schools in Northern Ireland. The benefits of it were endless, and children from all backgrounds were educated together. And I just want to put that firmly on the record. So I'm a good supporter and always have been of the controlled sector. That said, as previous members of the committee has said, there is a growing demand for integrated education and for greater movement and progress in relation to seeing the sector expand and also ensuring that our children are educated together. I think all of us aspire to see that. It's about breaking down the barriers of the past, both in education and in housing and other elements of our society as well. So in relation to this bill, although far from perfect, and my concerns are very well on record in relation to how it's been drafted, I do firmly believe in integrated education, but how we get there is an entirely different matter, and this bill presents difficulties, as we've heard from yourselves, CCMS and many others as well. So with that said, do you believe integrated schools education has been disadvantaged over the years, Mark? And are you aware of a mechanism or process that can provide us with an accurate audit of the real needs in an area?
Again, and thank you very much for your comments, Daniel. Widely and specifically about Strabane Controlled Primary School, a school I visited on a number of occasions, Daniel. Not when you were there, but I share some of your comments and obviously your concerns in terms of community conversations, in terms of audits of areas. We are, do we have the solution, Daniel? No, we don't have the solution. at all. We firmly believe that we need communities to be part of conversations about the solutions and the education in their area, along with the children and the young people in the area. This needs to be a community conversation. How community conversations work is a different matter, and I think that process hasn't been clearly agreed upon yet. But I think an audit as such, how you audit attitudes which are changing in communities, and how you audit and how you identify need. And one of our concerns in the bill is the fact that it's the role of the department to both identify, to promote the need and create demand, and also to meet that demand. I don't know actually how that happens on the ground. So unfortunately, Daniel, I can't give you a solution. What I can say is we're firmly committed to communities being involved. We're firmly committed to parental preference being respected. And we're also firmly committed that, your first point was, have integrated schools been disadvantaged? Let us not underestimate the significant work carried out by parents in setting up grant-maintained integrated schools, and the significant work. Let us not underestimate that work. And I'm sure their stories will clearly state their concerns about how that process has gone through. What my role here must be to talk about any disadvantage that is there for the controlled sector. And that is our concern, that one, we may be perceived to be part of the problem and not a key part of the solution. We must all work together to deliver on this solution across all sectors. I may have gone across a number of areas there, Daniel, but I hope I've given you some understanding of how our concerns.
Just in relation to Clause 7, what, in your opinion, would Clause 7 do for parental preference?
Well, the problem of it, the presumption here is that, and you heard yesterday from colleagues in CCMS and otherwise, the presumption here is that a new school must be an integrated school, unless there are special circumstances. If the parental preference is that it's not an integrated school, say the parental preference in the area is that it is a Catholic maintained or a controlled school, or that it's an Irish medium school, how does that work? The presumption is, the default position here is integrated first. And so that the presumption is already that parental preference are for an integrated school. Parental preference is for a high quality school. It's for good schools. We must have our schools being inclusive and open to all. We know that, but the process here is a reverse process. We should be working to make sure all our schools are inclusive and open to all. Therefore, all schools meet this requirement. All schools should meet the purposes of integrated, as stated, of integration in this bill. So that's how it would affect parental preference, Daniel.
And this bill,
Daniel, that's 6 minutes. If you could make a final point, please. Thanks.
There have been concerns expressed by other witnesses in previous sessions that this bill could be open to quite a significant number of judicial reviews if it goes ahead in its current form. Would you share that view? And also, just a very brief supplement to that, as a body, are you satisfied with the level of consultation the sponsor of this bill initiated with you in relation to the bill?
Taking the first point, are we concerned about judicial reviews? We have to be concerned about judicial reviews. You as legislators must be concerned about judicial reviews. And the concern is, again, not about the intention of our children being educated within this bill. It is around the need for precision and the definitions and the wider implications that would result in judicial reviews, which are costly and timely, and time-bound. Are we satisfied with the level of consultation with the proposer? I had a very positive meeting with Kelly Armstrong after the second reading, and that was a positive meeting. The meeting was at our request. There were, as you would imagine, some very key areas of agreement between us around the importance of our children and young people being educated together. Some concerns were raised. For the last 4 months, we have now looked and consulted elsewhere. We have a concern, and I have a concern. I'm not sure what consultation took place before the first reading of the bill. I have to say I wasn't in this post before that, so I can't. CSSC also did not exist before 2016. However, we should be working together on what this looks like, not potentially creating something that may cause concerns for other sectors. I want to support our children and young people being educated together, as does the organisation I represent.
Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Robbie Butler, MLA, please. Robbie there.
I'm here, Chair. You got
Thanks,
me?
Robbie.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you for your presentation this morning, guys. It's very interesting, it really is. And just genuinely, I think the committee has engaged on the bill proactively, and I do think we can get somewhere. I think the bill has potential, but I do share much of the fears that you have outlined, particularly in regards to Clause 3 and Clause 7. And I think the proposer of the bill has indicated, certainly verbally, that she is prepared to work with us on a number of those issues. What I'm becoming increasingly interested in, but is the absolute truth behind education in Northern Ireland, and I keep needing to tease this out, and some of it is being teased out. Because in a lot of the parental surveys, when you ask the question, do you want integrated education in Northern Ireland, I would suggest if we did a survey today, you'd probably get 90 to 95% of people who would say yes, they want integrated education. But I think when you go down into the detail of what people understand integrated education to be, then it gets slightly more complex. Now, over this past few weeks, I've asked a number of questions, and I'm now starting to get a bit of a picture. I suggest that the number one priority for integrated education is educating children of different backgrounds together. That's to be everybody's number one priority. And second priority probably is the ethos of the school, possibly. And the third priority might be the Board of Governors. I think the Chair had reminded me yesterday that it is that entirely, and I get that. But there is a sliding scale of priorities. When we look at some of the figures that are now coming out in terms of how our children currently are educated, I would actually hazard to say that the controlled school sector actually stacks up pretty darn well. I mean, you've shared some figures today which would indicate that less than 2/3 of the pupils in that sector come from the majority community in that area, I suspect. But there was a stat that was revealed to us yesterday in department figures with regard to the integrated sector, where they said that 75% of integrated schools fail to have 30% of pupils from the minority community. If that is the case, and I'm going to ask you the question, I'm not suggesting it because I accept the Chair's point that integrated education is more than just the figures. Would it be fair to say that controlled schools have demonstrably shown that they, by nature, that they are perhaps even more integrated than integrated schools?
Oh, thank you for, as always, a very simple question, Robbie. And as you said yourself, this is a very complex picture. What people understand when they answer polls of what integrated education is, what members of the committee themselves will understand as to what an integrated school is, are not clear and are not precise. Everybody understands that when you talk about integrated education, we are talking about our children and young people being educated together. And I think that's important. But the important thing in this bill, and the important thing for you as legislators, is you need to be clear of actually what is an integrated school and what is not an integrated school. But I think your question is the controlled sector outperforming the integrated sector in terms of integration? I'm talking
in terms of people numbers in the higher sense. I mean, there's lots of numbers being bandied about at the moment, and it's.
I don't have a comparative study. What I can tell you is on one level, I'm very confident with the fact that controlled schools, one, the ethos is open to all, and the figures clearly demonstrate that they are open to all. I'm also very clear that we all know we have work to do, but that applies as much to an integrated school as it does to a controlled school, as it does to a Catholic maintained school. And one of the things we welcome in the bill is the potential for there to be development funding of the role of the inspectorate, we would support that in terms of improving what is inclusion. So, Robbie, I'm not going to tell you that the controlled sector outperforms the integrated sector because I don't have the data to tell you that. I can tell you what one of my colleagues said to you yesterday, which is I firmly believe that the controlled sector needs to step up and clearly demonstrate itself as the sector which is open to all, and that we should be challenging working with other sectors as well.
No problem. I think the bill in some ways poses issues maybe in terms of complexity and legal compliance and open to judicial review. I would actually like to see ambitious targets for all sectors in terms of educating our children together. I think the removal of the lack of looking at targets then negates the very first priority, which is educating our children together. And I think every sector should be faced with those, not just integrated, controlled, maintained, the whole lot. Because we say it publicly, we say it privately. Actually, we all agree our children being educated together. But obviously, in society in Northern Ireland, we have other barriers to that, where we live and so on, and transport and those type of things. Just a little bit of clarification, if you could just inform me a wee bit better about in and around the controlled Irish medium and the controlled integrated, the scale of those, where they are, what they are, and because to be honest, this is, again, I'm just picking up on things, I'm just hearing these things, I'm very, very interested to hear about those.
Great, very happy to give you...
Happy enough for that to be final question, Robbie, just in case you want to ask anything else. Yeah,
no,
thanks.
Chair. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Yeah, very happy to provide you with information to that separately, and the committee information that separately. There are two controlled Irish medium schools, and there are a number of Irish medium schools that are voluntary Irish medium schools. There are two that are controlled Irish medium schools. One's in Belfast and one's in Dungiven. There are also currently today, I think the number is 30. At the times of the last DE census, there were 27 controlled integrated schools. There are currently, as you'll be aware, there have been a number of transformations over the last number of months. I believe the number is now 30 controlled integrated schools. And again, I can get the exact number and list of them. And as I said very early on, we value our controlled integrated and controlled Irish medium schools as much as we do all controlled schools. They are controlled schools. They have an ethos which is open to all. We support them. As you know, and I won't go into any length on this, the controlled sector has had a historical deficit of support. It is the role of our sector to support our sectoral body, to support controlled schools, and to support and challenge the Education Authority on its delivery as the managing and employing authority for controlled schools. So happy to provide more detail outside of that. I didn't come with a complete list of all the schools as you wouldn't have expected me to do so. So yes, 30 and 2 at the moment are the numbers.
Thank you. I'll get a bit more into that. Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you, guys.
Thanks. Nicola Brogan, MLA, please. Thanks.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Mark and Jane, for your presentations here this morning. I suppose following on from this morning's presentation and the evidence we received yesterday and in previous weeks, one of the main concerns I still have is about the use of the word promote and how the integrated education sector may be elevated above others. And I mentioned this again yesterday, specifically above the Irish medium sector. But in saying that, so I completely understand your concerns, and I have my own concerns around that. But in saying that, as has already been demonstrated this morning, there is a demand for integrated education throughout the North. So if we don't use that word promote, how do we meet that demand otherwise?
Thank you, Nicola. Yes, and yes, we share the concern about the word promote, whilst respecting the demand. I have a simple answer, which I don't think is going to be particularly helpful for you. The simple answer is, and it's on two levels. The first thing is, this is a matter for the independent review, because actually these are complex processes, and it's really important that the independent review, as it looks at how this is met and how it moves forward. So that will be number one. The other point I was making, the way that we move this forward is by all sectors working together, not by one sector in any form of isolation. And that's not said in any negative way, but you want all sectors working together to promote integrated education, i.e. promoting our children and young people being educated together. That's what you want to happen. You don't want it to sit in a separate place. All schools need to be considering how they are open to all and how they are moving forward. The problem, and the problem we have with this bill is it does, I believe, further sectoralise integrated education by promoting a sector. Surely, education together should be across all schools. It's not about an integrated sector. It is about all of our sectors coming together. So, two simple answers. Let's ask the independent review to do its job. Number two, let's get all of our sectors working closely together. Remember, NICE has had a strategic aim to promote, support and grow integrated education since 1987. So the word promote has been there. How the department can promote, i.e. create demand and meet it, predicting into the future, I don't know practically how that works on the ground, which is why independent review is the way forward, surely.
Yeah, well, listen, as I've outlined, I do share those concerns about creating the demand as well, and about the use of the word promotion, elevating that above other sectors. But the demand also is there, so I think we need to find a way to do that. And you lead me on to my next question about the independent review. So I've raised that a few times with different stakeholders, and some were saying, yes, you should wait until the independent review because this here bill would preempt the kind of findings. Others are saying the review could take too long and you're going to be waiting a number of years for the findings to be done, and then it'll take another few years for actual recommendations to be implemented. So how do you kind of come back at that there? What do you think about that?
Okay, so I would suggest that the time frame, the timescales, and the outworkings of the independent review would be a matter for the Northern Ireland Assembly, because it's something that comes under. So potentially, those timeframes are within the gift and influence, I would suggest, of legislators, and the outworkings will be around the legislation, potentially in policy that comes out. Yes, if something's to take a significant period of time, yes, we need to adjust parental preference as it exists today. It is a preference, and we do need to, look at how we meet the need. And I would go back to one of the ways is not to create legislation that potentially separates and causes more complexity. The way is to get sectors to work effectively together of how we address our children and young people being educated together, because we have forums and we have ways to do it. I tried to say at the end of my short introduction, we have been heartened by CCMS, a number of bodies clearly stating that we are round the table here wanting our children and young people being educated together. Let's take that at face value. Take at face value what we are saying about the controlled schools. Let's actually drive that forward. Let's look at what that looks like and meet that demand in the ways that we can, through shared education and through the area planning process, supportively using what we have at the moment, and then let the independent review, and you as legislators, I'm sure, will challenge the minister of the day in terms of where that goes.
Okay, thanks for that, Mark. I suppose my final point just is that I'm sure you can understand the concerns for those that really are pushing for integrated education, the concerns of the delay of an independent review. So, and I can understand those as well. But listen, thanks so much to both of you there, and thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Excuse me. Thanks, Nicola. Mark, I mentioned in the second stage debate, I think it was Martin Luther King's reference to being asked to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism during the civil rights movement. I have a real feeling of pupils and parents who wish to access integrated education being asked to do the same in Northern Ireland at this moment in time, but we can take that on in the rest of the bill stages. Can I just check one clarifying question? If I understood Robbie's question right, he seemed to be asking you to comment on the comparison of the mixed nature of pupils in non-integrated control schools compared to integrated control schools, I presume there is more of a mixed pupil profile in integrated control schools on the whole than there are in non-integrated control schools.
Well, the figures I have here, Chris, and I'll give you what I have. And again, these are part of DE census, and we can make sure that we provide wider figures for you. If you talk about the whole controlled sector, it's 60.8% are Protestant, 10.3 are Catholic, and 28.85 are other. If you remove controlled integrated schools, and they're the figures I have, the number of Protestants goes up to 61.8. The number of Catholics goes down by about 0.5% or so, or a bit more, 9.6. And the number of others goes down slightly to 28.5. So that would clearly state, Chris, yes, controlled integrated schools, because of the support they get to promote their diversity, do have a more diverse nature than, in terms of the number of pupils in the schools and a breakdown, than the body. But as I said, and as you know, there are controlled schools which are every kind of mix. We have controlled schools that are 99% Catholic. We have controlled schools away, and you've said it yourself. It's not a numbers game. Chris, can I just say one thing?
Yeah.
Not sitting here for gradualism in any way whatsoever. Sitting here to promote our children and young people to be educated together. I personally could do nothing else, and I'm not here personally, but neither could CSSC. We have a firm commitment to our children and young people being educated together. We don't want to be treated as the problem, Chris. We want to be treated as part of the solution.
I think that's a good note to finish on, Mark. Thanks very much indeed for your presentation today. Thanks to Mark and Jane, and for the time you've taken with us. We'll stay in touch with you, I'm sure. Thank you. Okay, Clark, I think we promptly moved the witnesses out of the spotlight there. And we can move to agenda item 3 then, Clark, yes?
Yes, Chair.
Yes, okay, which is our oral briefing from the Education Authority on the Integrated Education Bill. Can I refer members to the Education Authority response on page 11 and welcome Michelle Corky, Director of Education at the Education Authority, John Unsworth, Assistant Director of School Development at the Education Authority, and Seamus Bradley, Head of Service, Shared Education and Sectoral Support at Education Authority. Excuse me for a moment, folks, before I bring you in. Diane, I owe you an apology there. Sorry, I hadn't picked you up on the attendance list there. My error, unintentional. I apologise for that, Diane. I will seek to make sure you're brought in for a good time in this session. I apologise. I was trying to keep an eye on the participants list there, and I had failed to notice you in the list there, Diane. Apologies. Okay, members. Then we move to agenda item 3. Then, Michelle, you're very welcome to committee today. We look forward to hearing from you. Thanks.
Justin as well, Chair.
Okay. I apologise for that. I'm not sure at what stage of the meeting you joined. It's possible that I missed the joining of the meeting and the addition of your names to the participant list there. Apologies. Okay. We'll move on then. Invite Michelle to make opening remarks. Thank you. Okay. Michelle, I think we're not hearing you. Is it possible your device is muted? We still can't hear you, Michelle. Sorry. Clark, that's not just me, is it? Can I check that?
I can't hear either.
Yeah, can I check that Assembly Broadcasting have added the witnesses to the spotlight? Yeah.
They're in the spotlight, Chair.
Okay. Bear with us for a moment, then we'll just double check our audio here.
Can you hear me now, Chair?
You can, Michelle. Thank you.
It's always just as simple as pressing a button, isn't it?
Thank you.
Sincere apologies for that delay, Chair. One of my colleagues has just gone to get a technician, but the power of being a woman, I was able to sort that out all by myself. So we would like to thank you for the opportunity to address you this morning. The Education Authority is committed to developing and supporting a range of opportunities which will provide sustained opportunities for children, young people, staff and parents to learn and work together in a planned and intentional way. This will include the continued development of new and innovative solutions to facilitate collaborative, shared and integrated educational experiences and the promotion of mutual understanding and good relations across the communities which the authority serves. Whilst the overall objectives of this draft bill may align to some extent with these aims, there is a range of well-founded concerns regarding the process by which it has been developed, aspects of its content and drafting, and the potential implication for its enactment. So our response very clearly outlines our role in terms of integrated and shared education. But in relation to this particular bill, the education bill has been carefully reviewed and considered by EA senior officers and by the Education Authority board members, including through a workshop organised specifically to facilitate board members' discussion on the draft bill. Members expressed concern at the absence of any consultation with the Education Authority by the proposer of the bill during its preparation and advance of its publication. I now turn to my colleagues to give an overview, a very brief overview of our concerns. John.
Thank you, Chair and members, and thank you, Michelle. Members will have our evidence paper in front of you, and we just wish to briefly highlight some of the main concerns reflected by our authority board members. Firstly, and we realise this has been mentioned by a number of other witnesses, we do have a concern about the potential crossover with the independent review of education. And members are already aware of those concerns. We share those concerns, and just around the timing of the introduction of this bill and how that could run across the work of the independent review. Our members also have a concern about what they see as a lack of connection between this draft bill and already existing legislation, in particular in relation to area planning, and the need to connect in the drafting of any new legislation and build on and indeed refer to what is already in legislation, particularly as that applies to area planning issues, which are quite an important consideration within this draft legislation. And I'm going to pass across now to my colleague Seamus to highlight some of the other areas.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Chair and members. Moving on, we have some concerns around the bill as currently drafted in terms of the potential for ongoing legal challenge. The bill appears to allow for schools to self-designate as integrated, which is at odds with the current well-established approach of designation through a formal development proposal process. Under the current arrangements, integrated schools are required to have reasonable numbers of both Protestant and Roman Catholic pupils, and it appears under Clause 7 that there is the potential for a new school to be established without meeting this reasonable numbers test. Indeed, there is also concern, moving on from that, regarding the use of the terminology that has been transposed from the 2016 Shared Education Act. While shared education shares many aims and purposes with integrated education, it is also substantially different from it. It is noted that many integrated schools participate massively in shared education, and the integrated sector has made and will continue to make valuable contributions to it. And it is through this sharing of good practice that the integrated schools play a unique role within shared education.
Our members would also highlight concerns a number of witnesses have expressed around the specific use of the term promote and we're aware that that's something that has been well discussed within the committee, and further work has been doing that. It's important to emphasise our EA board members share that very substantial concern around the use and potential interpretation of that term to promote, and will not explore that any further at this point, but it's worth noting that's a major concern for our board members about the potential implications of promote. We also, as I've already said, and this is a particular concern, have concerns around how this legislation would interact with and potentially confound the current area planning legislation and arrangements. And members' perspective, and they're working within the area planning legislation month in and month out, but their perspective is that this draft legislation doesn't appear to take sufficient or adequate account at all of what's already there within the area planning legislation in terms of how it allows for detailed consideration at local area level of options and the bringing forward of options. And the view of members is that this bill could have done more in its drafting to reflect what's already there within the area planning legislation. Seamus.
So moving on and returning to the issue of potential legal challenge, the presumption in clause 7 of the bill that all new schools will be integrated appears to be untenable for a number of reasons. The specific section of the bill set alongside other sections would appear to render the operation of area planning arrangements extremely challenging, as John has just mentioned. Furthermore, then, moving forward, the proposed obligation to develop, implement and maintain an integrated education strategy is a cause for concern. We value the need for the strategy. However, the requirements appear to be demanding and potentially discriminatory. There is concern regarding the resources that would be required for the implementation of such a strategy, and as already indicated, the development and funding of such a strategy in advance of the work of the Independent Review of Education would appear to be ill-timed and unhelpful in achieving the ultimate aims of that review. That concludes our opening remarks. Thank you, Chair and members.
Thanks for that. I'll go straight to Diane Dodds and then Justin McNulty, please. Thank you.
Thank you to everyone. A couple of questions that I think are important, and just a very brief remark. We have now taken weeks upon weeks of evidence around this integrated education bill, and there is a lot of concern and clearly no clear consensus across the committee on many of the issues in relation to the bill. You indicated that there was the potential for ongoing legal challenge should this bill pass in its current form. I have asked, and I understand that we are now going to get a clause by clause legal interpretation of the bill, which I think in light of both submissions today is very wise for the committee to do. Do you want to give us very, very briefly a scenario where you see legal challenge?
So if we take the situation around the self-designation of a school, where potentially the bill opens the door for a school to self-designate as integrated, that goes against the current position and the current accepted practice. And schools are not permitted to self-designate for other reasons. So, for example, a school cannot simply establish new provision. It cannot create a new nursery unit or a new sixth form without going through a development proposal process. And therefore, those schools may point that out and take legal challenge that they should also be able to self-designate different elements of their provision moving forward without a development proposal process.
Okay. And that's really the concern around clause 1 of the bill?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that is a good example where the bill will have consequences for other sectors at other times because of the definition within the bill. Okay, that's very, very helpful to know that and to hear that spelled out so clearly. Do you have figures for the number of schools who are maybe in the pipeline that would like to change designation to integrated status?
Yes, we have a number of schools that are in that process now. There are formalities around the notification and so on, so we have to be cautious around that. And obviously, there are sensitivities at local level. But at the minute, we are aware of around 4 or 5 schools who are actively on that transformation journey. And the number of schools who are going that route has increased over recent years, as I'm sure members will be aware. It is through the transformation to control integrated status that the majority of integrated provision has been established over recent years. And we see that as a positive development and something we work in close partnership with our colleagues in the Northern Ireland Council for Integrated Education to support before and particularly after a school has formally transformed to controlled integrated status.
Okay, so the growth in schools transforming to integrated status is within the control sector.
That's right. That has been the pattern over recent years, yes.
And that's another interesting stat, because I think sometimes what we fail and we don't recognise, we look at integrated education and many assume that is the integrated sector. But what we're not actually, and that this morning has been particularly helpful in drawing out those statistics, is that integration of education, i.e. integration of all types of children and all the rest of it, is actually really happening within the control sector at a faster pace perhaps than within the integrated sector. Is that fair to say?
Well, we would, in terms of the support that we give and the work that we do with integrated schools, we provide that to all integrated schools. Obviously, the term integrated has a formal legal meaning. It can be a grant-maintained integrated school or, as is the case to date, a controlled integrated school, and we provide support to both those categories.
I know the chair is getting really angsty about the tone of the questioning today, but that is what the questioning is here for, Chair. It is very important to draw out the facts.
So don't be
I watched it, and it's possibly the reason that you didn't even notice us on the participants list, because I was in the meeting before you were. But anyway,
I don't think I would have brought you in immediately first if there had been any intention on my part to
no,
exclude.
I accept that, Chris. I genuinely accept that. So that is, those are interesting stats. I think that we would also benefit in this committee from a more detailed explanation of the conflict that you see, and I would appreciate if the committee doesn't want to ask for it, I would actually like to ask it, of the conflict that you see between clause 7 of the bill and the current area planning, and where the potential for legal challenges there. And I know that's an onerous task in a couple of minutes. So if you wanted to send in something around that would be very helpful.
Yes, of course, we can provide a more detailed response, but just very briefly, the concern of our members, who, as I say, are dealing with area planning legislation and processes month in and month out. So they're very well acquainted with this and the challenges that it brings. Their concern is around the implied preferential treatment to one sector as opposed to others, and in a situation of resources being scarce, the potential then, the conflict that they have in terms of one piece of legislation that, if it was enacted, would require them to give preference to an integrated sector, as opposed to the needs and the challenges that they face month in and month out in terms of facilitating and considering development proposals from other sectors. So that it's that preferential treatment which would be a real concern, and how that would leave us as the planning authority open to legal challenge potentially in a situation where you might be turning down one proposal in favour of another because this legislation might require you to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Diane. Can I ask a very quick question just in terms of the concerns for clause 1? Clause 1.2 refers to an integrated school. Would your concerns be addressed if that clause made clear that an integrated school was as defined by the Education Reform Order?
I think, Chair, that would help in terms of clarification. Yes, and this is one of our concerns, is around how this draft bill does connect to and build on existing legislation, including the 1989 order.
Okay, but your concern could be addressed as easily as inserting as defined by the Education Reform Order?
I would have to give that consideration, Chair, and consult with colleagues on that one.
Okay, thanks. I'll bring in Justin and then we'll go to other members as quick as I can. Thanks, Justin.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Michelle, Seamus, John. No need for any angstiness, guys. We're all on the same page. We're all in support of integrated education. We just want to thoroughly scrutinise the legislation. I don't think any of us on this committee want our fingerprints on legislation that hasn't been thoroughly and properly scrutinised. I don't think anybody can have a problem with that. In terms of the issue you've raised relating to area planning and how the current draft bill doesn't take into account existing area planning, can you expand on that? I'm sorry if Deanne has already asked that question, but I couldn't quite hear the detail of it. Just expand on that for me, folks, please.
So it's just to say, in terms of the current area planning arrangements, they do provide for, and the framework provides for, a detailed process at each stage of the area planning process. It includes assessment of need and indeed demand within a local area as the strategic area plan is being developed. Now, as members may be aware, we're moving into the preparation of the next iteration of that strategic area plan. And there are already mechanisms and processes in place that allow every single sector to be represented and to contribute to discussion around, hopefully in a collaborative way, what is the best way to provide education in a particular area. And in the view of our members, who, as I say, are very well used to working with these arrangements, this legislation doesn't seem to take account of the fact that that already is there, that there already are fora in which different sectors can contribute their view, their thinking, in which analysis of need and demand is and has to be formally taken account of in preparing area solutions. And the view of members is that this bill as drafted doesn't appear to recognise that. It seems to work from an assumption that there is no obvious way for those views and for that demand to be assessed within current arrangements and to impose something additional on top of it.
And you pointed to the fact that you hadn't been communicated with in the bill, the working up of this bill at all. Are you feeling that your input has been appreciated at this point in terms of the bill, in terms of what your concerns are? I know we are challenging you now, committee. We are questioning your committee. Do you feel now you've been recognised the input, the important input the EA has to play in this drafting this legislation?
Yes, Justin, I think it would be fair to say that we have very much welcomed the opportunity to put the view of the Education Authority Board and the Education Authority forward at this time to be considered as part of this bill, and we absolutely welcome the opportunity.
Okay. Folks, listen, thank you very much for your evidence today. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Could I bring in Robin Newton, MLA, please? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. And can I thank Michelle, John and Seamus for being with us today. It's been extremely helpful. I wonder, I have to say it is good to hear that integration is working, and the statistics that have been placed out there, I think, are extremely encouraging. I would just ask three simple questions, and Chair, if I can ask the three together, and then that might save time, and then the panel can decide who's going to answer.
Thanks, Rob.
But it was remarks that Seamus made that lead me to question number one, when he said that the draft bill appears to be demanding and potentially discriminatory. So perhaps if Seamus or whoever would like to make some comments around that. And in terms of the bill and area planning, is it too strong a comment to say that if this bill were introduced, it would make area planning ineffective? Is that too strong a comment to make? And then around comments on the definitions of integrated education. and integrated school are examples of the concerns that you have as the bill is currently drafted. The bill appears to allow for schools to self-designate as integrated. So perhaps, Chair, around those three questions or comments.
Thank you, Robin. Very happy to respond. In terms of question 1, in relation to the comments that Seamus made about demanding and discriminating elements of the bill, I pass to Seamus.
Thank you. Robin, where we come from on that is that once you begin to create differences between the sectors and you do not create essentially an equality of access to opportunity, then there is the potential for discrimination to be challenged back at us, that we are discriminating by giving preferential treatment. And it is the element, and it has been raised by a number of other bodies as well, that somehow that we could end up inadvertently in a position where one sector is elevated above others at a point in time when decisions are being made. The current legislation that we all operate on creates a starting point where everyone comes equally, and indeed area planning processes are based on that assumption. And essentially where it brings us to is that if a school, for example, and I'll not preempt the third question at this moment in time, but if a school were to self-designate, that isn't just about a title above that school's name or on the school badge. That actually triggers a range of changes around how that school interacts with other parts of the system. So there are implications around access to home to school transport, for example. There are implications around floor area from the building handbook when minor and capital works are being established, and the need around that. It changes the nature of the school. And so that is where we feel that other schools could begin to say, we are now being discriminated against and preferential treatment is being given to a particular sector over others. And so it very much goes in the face of the current approach of equality. Now, within that approach, there are, I suppose, differing priorities at this moment in time, and not every school gets what it wants when it comes forward into area planning processes, or indeed the process for capital investment and so on for new buildings. But that approach takes each school equally in its context and looks at it in that manner.
In terms of your second question, Robin, and area planning and this bill rendering it ineffective, I'd ask John to respond.
Yes, thanks, Michelle. Look, I'm aware members have had presentations from the officials in the department who have lead responsibility for area planning, and we're aware of their view that were this bill to be implemented, it would cause considerable difficulties for the operation of the current area planning arrangements, and we would concur with that view as officers and indeed as board members who are working within those arrangements, as I say, month in and month out. That is an informed view, and it does come back to the issue again of the implied preference and the duty to promote one sector as opposed to others, which would raise considerable difficulties within the way the area planning process currently works and the making of decisions on development proposals if there was a legal obligation to promote and by implication to give preference. It would render those current arrangements very challenging to operate.
And in terms of your third question, Robin, and the definitions of integration, I think that's where we have the board have a serious concern. And Seamus gave an example of the self-designation and how that would cause a problem. But there's also an implication here of the work that's being done in shared education, and not to preempt any other questions, but I think it's really important to talk about the extent of shared education and the impact it has had on our schools. Seamus?
Yes. Shared education, as you know, is embedded in legislation for all schools in Northern Ireland, and it is very much driven by the energy of difference of different types of schools coming together and looking and providing high quality shared experiences for their young people. And that is all driven by young people being exposed to things that are different cultural background, belief, and indeed just social activities that may not be familiar to them within their own community. And therefore what we are working towards, and I think it's been covered in earlier evidence as well, this is about young people and our children having opportunities to learn together. Now the mechanism for that can be different in different parts of the province and needs to be appropriate for different parts of the province, because we cannot simply insist on one singular model. We need the ability to work flexibly. That means that in some parts of the province, we have very strong contributions from the integrated sector to shared education. In other parts of the province, the community would like to take another approach to their young people learning together. And I think that that's something that we need to accept and indeed facilitate as we move forward.
Okay, Robin.
Yeah, just very briefly, in terms of the shared education, what Seamus was saying there, I think, was that there is you're greatly encouraged by the work that's being done there. It's a bespoke situation, pertains to wherever the ambitions for shared education are, rather than a prescriptive way of doing things. Am I right in that?
Yes, Robin, absolutely. Shared education, and I stress again, the integrated sector plays a significant role and contributes to shared education across the province. But it allows a local model of sharing and shared learning to be put in place that accepts different types of schools into that experience for the young people. And also it's worth saying that over time, young people become familiar with themselves, with each other, and so we continually have to expose them to difference. That is the purpose of shared education. And as they become more familiar, we are always seeking for other partners and other people for them to interact with, so that they are broadening their horizons, they are thinking differently each step of the way, and that is the purpose of shared education and the role that it plays for all schools. And right now, as we sit, we have about 2/3 of the schools active in funded programmes from the Department of Education and SEUPB under shared education. There's about 1/3 of schools that have not yet been able to partner up, and that's why it's important that we can continue this journey with all schools and not end up with a resource just in one aspect.
Okay, thanks, Robin.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the panel.
Thanks. Daniel McCrossan, MLA, please. Daniel there. Oh, come Nicola, and if Daniel returns, we'll get him back in. Nicola.
Thank you, Chair, and hello everybody. It's good to see you all this morning. Thanks for coming along and giving your presentation. I have already raised this morning and yesterday, but kind of the main issue that I've been made aware of with all the evidence sessions about the bill is, first of all, the use of the word promote, and then with Clause 7, the presumption that all new schools would be integrated schools. But yesterday we heard evidence from the Children's Commissioner, and Kula Yusuma had said that basically she felt that there was a need for integrated education to be promoted because she felt that integrated education had been left behind in the past, and so needed that promotion to give it a level playing field. Now, I had put to her about the Irish medium sector and how that would affect them, that I didn't think it was fair that integrated education should be elevated above Irish medium, but I do understand her concerns. And Michelle, in your opening remarks and in the written submission to the committee, the Education Authority have said that they have a role to play in encouraging and facilitating integrated education as part of their statutory duty, along with the department. So, can you tell me how the Education Authority have encouraged and facilitated integrated education, and how you intend to in the future as well, to try and, I suppose, alleviate some of the issues that Kula had yesterday, or concerns that she had yesterday?
Yes, certainly, Nicola. Thank you. I'll ask John to address your question.
Thank you. Nicola, our main route and mechanism and framework for encouraging and facilitating is the current legislative arrangements that exist whereby any school can move towards transformation to integrated status. That framework is there, it's been there over many years, and a growing number of school communities are availing of that legislation and that process that is there to allow them to respond to need where there is need at local level. And as I said earlier, we have growing numbers of schools who are doing that, who are using those arrangements. Now, we work very actively with any school along with our partners in the Northern Ireland Council for Integrated Education, we work very actively then with schools that are on that transformation journey, particularly once the development proposal has been approved. So, I mean, there are a number of schools that were approved for transformation to control integrated status earlier this year by the Minister and the Department, including for the first time a school that was previously under CCMS management. And we work closely to support those schools to develop their ethos, to develop their provision, so that it moves more towards integration in the way that it is understood. They're already well on a journey by the time they get to transformation. So that's our role. Obviously, we do work in close partnership with NICE to make school communities aware of that possibility, of that option. There is always more that can be done. But I think one of the views of our board members is that there are opportunities already there within legislation. There are opportunities and frameworks there already in the integration works policy and strategy and support from the department, which we and other partners clearly do our best to promote and to support and to bring to the attention of schools where there is that interest and that demand.
All right, thank you for that. That was a very detailed answer, and thank you for that. I do just want to ask as well, in the absence of this bill, if it wasn't to proceed, what would the Education Authority do to meet the already unmet demand for integrated education? So above and beyond the encouraging and facilitating.
Well, yes, I think there, as has become clear in previous evidence sessions and discussions, there is an issue which I know our board members would echo in relation to evidence of unmet demand. There are ways of evidencing demand at local level through the current area planning arrangements, and there is provisions, we already said, within the current legislation for transformation for parents and communities to express demand by the simple taking of a ballot within a school. And in the work that we do, that is the basis we work from, rather than opinion polls, which may vary from one. So there is an issue in there we do have to consider carefully, and I would say members have to consider carefully, is how do you measure demand and how do you define unmet demand?
Yeah, I'd agree with you there actually about the query over those types of surveys, and I think that's something I've definitely taken away from the last few evidence sessions, is how we do measure the demand, but it's certainly something we need to focus on. Listen, I'm happy with that there. Thanks so much to the three of you, and thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Nicola. How does the EA measure demand, given it has a statutory duty to do so?
How do we measure demand for integrated education?
Yeah.
Well, that comes through from local level, Chair. It's there in the current arrangements for transformation. There is the facility and the opportunity for any school community to come forward to seek a ballot for transformation to integrated status.
Okay, and what does the EA do to promote that, to inform people of that, or do you just sit and wait?
No, we actively work with our colleagues in the Northern Ireland Council for Integrated Education, with other bodies such as the IEF and the Department of Education Integrated Schools branch, to make school communities aware that that facility is available. I'm sure there's always more that can be done in terms of awareness raising and information sharing.
And also, Chair, if I may permit, as part of our role in the area planning arena, we have a duty to consult on all of those bases, and that's normally an option for schools in terms of area planning, so it's built into that process already.
Okay, I've a lot more questions, but I think time has beaten us today, unfortunately. Can I just double check I haven't missed any other members that want to ask a question? And if not, sincerely thank you for your time and your evidence with us today. We look forward to keeping in touch with you on this and other matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, if I could ask Assembly Broadcasting to remove witnesses and add members back to the spotlight, and ask Clark to summarise any actions before we go into our next agenda item with the Bill Clark of the Northern Ireland Assembly. Clark?
So, Chair, a lot of the same ideas came up again today. Particularly, the CSSC were really concerned about the equity across all schools, and particularly in terms of funding. The clash between CCMS's current duties and new duties was highlighted. The EA then seemed to be content that a detailed explanation of the conflict in respect of the conflict between Clause 7 and area planning. They were going to come back to us, with more information about that, and then, but they seemed to be satisfied that if the insertion of "as defined by the Education Reform Order" or a similar amendment were made to Clause 1, that would allay concerns about the disjuncture in the statute book, which they had initially mentioned. There's an interesting conversation there about evidencing unmet demand, which can maybe I'll just check, has the written evidence got all of that contained in it. But that's it for the moment.
Okay.
Chair. Yeah.
Okay. And then, Clerk, the next item then we move into closed session for, correct?
Please, Chair.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. If I can move the committee into closed session then.